welcome to Trusty Chords, the podcast which aims to celebrate music and those that create it. For lovers of Australian music, the name Jamie Hutchings would be a familiar one. Most notably, he's known as the frontman of Sydney rock outfit Bluebottle Kiss, who lasted for 14 years and issued a raft of amazing records before their split in 2007. They've been called arguably Australia's most idiosyncratic guitar band, and their music is arguably not as marketable as critics would like it to be, but Jamie isn't exactly someone who puts that high on his list of priorities. Since Bluebottle Kiss split, he's continued with a number of projects, including a solo career, work with Infinity Broke, The Tall Grass, and more. When you put it to Jamie, he's relatively humble, but prolific doesn't even begin to cut it. Just a couple of years ago, the local music world welcomed Bluebottle Kiss back into the world with open arms, with a series of reunion shows taking place around the country. As someone who was at their Melbourne show, I can tell you now it was a wonderful experience I'd recommend to anyone. This week, Bluebottle Kiss hit the road to launch a brief tour with Brisbane's own Scream Feeder, playing shows in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. If I were you, I'd head along, but that's just me talking out loud. Anyway, Jamie Hutchings is my guest this week, so I strongly urge you to check out the band's impressive back catalogue, buy a ticket to their show, and once you're done doing that, have a listen to our chat, and I'll see you at the end of the episode for some general housekeeping. Jamie Hutchings, thank you very much for joining this episode of Trusty Chords.
Thanks for having me, Tyler.
So for those who might not recognise your name, could you give me a quick few words on who you are and why we're chatting today?
I'm Jamie Hutchings is my name. I've been writing, recording, and performing for, I think, about 30 years now, maybe more. Yeah, so I started out with Bluebottle Kiss. So that lasted about the first 15 years, and then was doing some solo things at the same time, and I've continued to do that. So I ended up doing around 6 solo albums all up. So about the same amount as what Bluebottle Kiss did. And then about 10 years ago, I formed an on again, off again quartet called Infinity Broke with my brother and my brother-in-law, and we've had a couple of different percussionist drummers called Infinity Broke. So we've released 3 albums, and I'm finishing a 4th album. And the other release I did for a while, I was collaborating with Peter Fenton from Crow. We did 1 album we called ourselves The Tall Grass. So I guess in terms of output, they're the different projects that I've done. And I do a lot of solo playing, both in Australia, and have travelled a fair bit, particularly solo, through Europe and other areas. So I don't know, a fair bit of producing as well, like just kind of produced quite a few bands, just helping them sort of arrange their material and work as a go-between between them and whoever's engineering. So I've done that a fair bit as well. Yeah.
So basically what I'm hearing is that when it comes to music, you're someone who doesn't like to, be a bit lazy. You like to always be moving and making things happen.
Yeah, I'm a doer.
Yeah.
That's for sure. I'm quite, not like that with everything, but when it comes to music, once music got its hooks in me, I was very much into finishing projects, and I'm still like that, irrespective of what happens to the project. I'm very much into finishing it, putting it out, doing it to the best of our or my ability, and then moving on into something else, or even sometimes doing 2 things at the same time. I find that really satisfying.
And that actually works as a very perfect segue, because you mentioned, when music gets its hooks into you. So what I usually like to do with the start of these podcasts is sort of going back in time to where a love of music first formed. So for you, Jamie, do you have a recollection of your earliest memory of when music first resonated with you?
I feel like the first music that I remember was music that stirred me emotionally somehow as a little league, like music that was quite melancholy and kind of just touched me. I always remember hearing Dancing Queen by ABBA, and that's got that classic bittersweet sort of style melody. Like it's in some ways a celebratory song, but it's got this minor key kind of melancholy element to it. I always remember hearing that, and I also remember sort of spying on my mom listening to the Barbara Streisand Barry Gibb album. I think I don't know if the album's called Memories, but it's got that song on it. It's full of, it's got that I am a woman in love. That
Yeah.
really, it's got those big duets between those two. And I remember being kind of moved by that album because Barbara Streisand is like a phenomenal um, singer and kind of pretty convincing whatever she's she sings. So I think early on they're the first musical memories. For some reason, I remember those two songs or those two albums.
So then, when you started listening to music for yourself, were there like any particular artists that you personally enjoyed? I mean, you obviously mentioned the likes of ABBA or Barbara Streisand, but I mean, I'm assuming those weren't artists that you were actually seeking out yourself. So, which of these, so I guess, which artists were you actually listening to and enjoying as a youngster?
Uh, the first the first band that I just went crazy over, like lots of people, was the Beatles.
Mhm.
Um, and that was a bit of a bonding thing for my brother Scott and me as well, and our friend Mark Moldre, who we still play music with. And the three of us had a fake band for a while, which is very unimaginatively called Beatles 2, where we'd dress up as the Beatles and we'd perform fake concerts for our parents. And because I was younger than Scott and Mark, I got designated to the George Harrison position. They got to be Paul and John. But we used to sit down and have Beatle marathon days. The three of us could memorize every single lyric. So I'd say the Beatles was the first love. And then not long after, I really got into Split Ends when I was a member of the Friends of the Ends fan club when I was about 9 or 10. So I started collecting Split Ends records. Yeah, sort of pre-puberty, kind of really got into them for a while too.
Yeah, right. It's a sort of a little bit of both ends of the spectrum there. You've got the very sort of, I guess, formative, pioneering sounds of the Beatles, and actually, I guess when you think about it, Split Ends were quite pioneering in their own sort of new wavy, very experimental sort of way. But I guess sonically, it almost feels like different ends of the spectrum, doesn't it?
Well, I think the thing that first got me into Split Ends was Neil Finn's early songs like History Never Repeats and
Yeah.
I Got You, which are quite Beatlesque. And then when I dug a bit further as a kid, I was like, oh, it turns into some bit of a wonderland. Like especially when you hear Tim Finn's songs, that there's a real strangeness, that sort of vaudevillian element, and Tim Finn's got this really bizarre high voice. And I think they were very influenced, I think, by early Roxy music. So there's that experimental element to that band. And then there's the pop element, which Neil Finn brought. But yeah, I think any music from then on where I was intrigued and I might get one song that would hook me. But then if there were other elements that kind of pricked my curiosity and I didn't quite understand straight away, I would want to go further. And it's been the same ever since.
So then, how did your love of music go into you actually playing music? Because you obviously mentioned, a fake band were like the Beatles too, but how did you actually sort of start actually playing music in earnest?
The first time I really played in a band, I was in primary school, and I used to sit at the back of this class with my friend Lucius. Lucius now plays drums in the prog metal band Cog,
All right.
who are very
Yeah.
popular. So we went to primary school together. He'd repeated a year because he was a really unruly kid, but for some reason I was very timid and shy, but we got on quite well. I think it was because we both loved music, and we had a teacher who wanted to start a bush band. He was this teacher that looked a bit like Abraham Lincoln, like no moustache, this beard, and I think he basically liked sort of traditional Australian bush music, and he wanted someone to play the bush bass, like the tea chest bass. Have you ever seen one of those?
Yes, I do know what I know what you're talking about, but I'm assuming some of the folks listening might not know. So,
Yeah, so someone I know he must have made it himself, but it's basically they get what's called a tea chest and I think a broom handle and then a piece of string, and it's like a one string bass. And he said, the teacher said, oh, like he was playing guitar and singing. Lucius was already playing the drums, and he wanted to audition people to play the bush bass. And Lucius was like, "You should go and try it out." And so I went up, and the teacher played, and it was basically you just had to pull down on the string and just try and play in a way that sounded like you were playing with the teacher. So it was completely intuitive, and I got the I got the gig. So that was the first time I ever played. I think I was maybe 11. Um, and then when I went to high school, my brother had really taken to the drums, but he didn't like me playing his drum kit. But I would just sort of sneak onto his drums when he wasn't home, and eventually moved out of home quite young. And I flunked music in the first year of high school, so I didn't take it as an elective. I came rock bottom of the class, and so I didn't take it as an elective. But I was in the end, I was the only kind of kid really. Lucius went to my high school too, but he wasn't there a lot, so he was the real drummer of the school. But I was kind of the second best drummer, so I would end up playing drums in the school band, and then my last year, well, I left school kind of early too. But when I was 15, I played drums in a kind of a covers band, uh, and did that for a while. Played drums and figured that was my calling as a musician. But I just started hearing songs in my head all the time, and slowly, I mean, it's another whole story, but slowly moved into just learning, teaching myself some rudimentary guitar, and sort of moved into trying to sing and play guitar sort of in my late teens.
So then the project that most people would know you from is, the project most people would know you from most prominently is Bluebottle Kiss. So how did Bluebottle Kiss come to be? Because you would have been, what, early 20s when that came about, was it?
Yeah, I was about 21. Like there was had a few garage bands where I was pretty much learning to play guitar and sing at the same time and write songs, just with friends, and couldn't really get any of them off the ground. And then I moved out of home and just had a kind of a acquaintance who became a good friend, who had a couple of housemates who were keen on being in a serious band, and he put the three of us together. That was yeah, the bass player's name was Sian and the drummer's name was Simon, and we just had this jam in a house. And both those guys didn't want to, they'd made it clear that they wouldn't, because I think I must have had a reputation of writing a lot of songs, but they made it clear they wouldn't play any of my songs, but that they would jam with me and we could write together. And that eventually became the first version of Bluebottle Kiss. So that was about 1993.
Okay. So then when the band actually, I guess, sort of really coalesced and everything, and even in this first sort of version of the band, was there a particular sound at all that you were sort of like seeking at all? Because the early stuff with Blue Bottle Kiss feels very reminiscent of a lot of those groups who like to flirt with the discordant and the unconventional. So was that sort of what you were aiming for as a musician, or was it just sort of a case of this is what we're listening to, let's play what we know, sort of thing?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think bands' first records, you can always tell who they're obsessed with and who they're listening to. And I think that's true of some of our early records too. But I know for myself, I sort of transitioned from listening to, I guess, from being a Beatles fan when I was a kid and really liking melody. And initially, my first songs, when I was a really basic guitarist, were very melodic, sort of guitar pop songs, I guess, like Rat Cat or Smudge or bands like that. But by the time Blue Bottle Kiss started, I was really, yeah, I really felt that I I wasn't really satisfied playing that sort of music. I really enjoyed when I played with other people. Just I guess that journey sort of element where, yeah, you kind of take things out into another stratosphere a bit. But then there's I guess that sort of singer songwriter basis to it, because that's just a natural. I think if anything, that's a natural perhaps skill that I have, is I seem to be able to intuitively put songs together. But I was never that satisfied with just doing that. So yeah, I was always hungry for new music, and also had a very musical family. Like my dad's a professional musician, very conservative professional musician, but very into traditional jazz. So grew up listening to a lot of jazz. Then sort of I guess pop music like the Beatles and so forth, but more and more, yeah, more exploratory music. And once I always found once I would find one band, I would go deeper and deeper and probably go further to the left of that band. Say Dinosaur Jr. I got
Mhm.
obsessed with for a while, but then went from there to Sonic Youth, who at first I didn't fully grasp, but then I became quite obsessed with them. And they're a lot more, to me, less accessible than Dinosaur Jr. So that kind of thing would happen. And I think that kind of fed into Bluebottle Kiss's music.
So that exploratory nature that you sort of took into music, I guess, is that something that came from your sort of your musical upbringing and sort of being I guess, sort of very odd question I'm sort of trying to get at, but I guess if you didn't have that sort of upbringing, do you feel that you would have sort of gone for those left of center sort of musical niches?
Yeah, I would have still. I
Yeah,
because my musical upbringing was not exploratory. Like my father was super conservative when it came to music,
of
really
course,
quite
yeah.
quite narrow on what he liked, and any of the music. Most of the music I've made, I don't think he would recognize it if he heard it. It's not really. He's very respectful and really lovely. He's been really helpful over the years, but it's really not. He's not into music as an exploration at all. He's into it more as a well, he's got a really beautiful feel, but he very much views it as a sort of skill and honing. He's not a songwriter. He's a player. He's a reed player, and it's very much about how well you play your instrument. So I think it's just more the genetics that everyone in our family is musical, but my actual bent is pretty different from where my parents were. My mother was probably more. She's not a musician, but she was probably more open minded. So maybe between the two of them, that kind of where it came from. But I reckon it would have happened to me either way, even if I was adopted or something. I reckon
Yeah,
I
right.
would have gone that way.
Yeah, it's all starting to make sense now. Because I think one thing I've always loved about Blue Bottle Kiss is this uncanny ability where you're able to craft these absolutely gorgeous songs and back them up with this sort of raucous energy and the sound that can often be sort of confronting in terms of how, well, I guess the word confronting comes to mind again. It can be sort of a confronting sound, but I feel like this can be both a blessing and a curse in terms of the audience that you can sort of attract from that. Like I feel the sound you had was perfect for the alternative crowd, but alienating to any potential mainstream success. Not that mainstream success is the be all and end all, but is that something that you sort of agree with, or am I sort of off the mark there with what you saw from being up the front of Blue Bottle Kiss?
No, you're absolutely right. And that was something that music industry people said very early on. There
Mhm.
were people that took a punt on us that really believed in the band, but there were people that surrounded them that would say that in different ways all the time. And even I remember an international record label person coming and seeing us and being very much like, oh, if you just cut the jagged edges off this song and did that, like yeah, like what you're saying, there's some real beauty in the music. I've even had people like not really fans, but go, "Why are you destroying this? Why don't you destroy that great song? I mean, to me, I don't see it that way, but for some people, yeah, like I was saying, there are traditional elements of singer songwriting. Well, a lot of those in the music in terms of the melodies, and so there's a beauty to a lot of Blue Bottle Kisses music. Some of it is just that's it is just it's beautiful from start to finish, and there's nothing discordant about it. But in general, the dissonance and the beauty kind of come together, which I suppose is why the name made sense. But it certainly would alienate audiences, and even back in like the '90s and so forth, when the independent scene was extremely elitist and kind of self-righteous in a way. Even people in the indie scene would sometimes be like people that were making noise music or post-rock music that didn't have that traditional singer-songwriter element. I would almost feel like they would. I used to feel like sometimes they would sort of not approve of the music we were making because it had those traditional elements. And then, like you're saying, people outside of that would find it too jarring and difficult, compared to Pearl Jam or Oasis or whatever they were listening to. So yeah,
Mm.
it definitely exists in a kind of its own place, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I did always love that quote, and I think you may even be on the Bluebottle Kiss Facebook page from Drum Media, where they labeled you the country's most idiosyncratic guitar band. It sort of just
Mm.
feels as though you guys are just sort of almost thrown in the too hard basket in terms of the categorization at times, because it's just you're going between these extremes all the time.
Yeah. Well, when we were first getting signed, the guy that was signing us, John O'Donnell, was very, very into the band, but his kind of gang that surrounded him, like John Watson, who went on to manage Silverchair and several. I remember they were really nice, but they would always say to John O'Donnell, and I think they even said it to me, like just being honest, like I look, to be honest, it's a hard sell. They
Mm.
always use those two words, like they'd say to John O'Donnell, like, "Yeah, go for it if you want to sign them," but the message was like, "But it's not going to be an easy sell to get out there." It was like, "Oh yeah, I know."
I mean, also, I guess with that in mind, I mean, is there a specific sort of, I guess, Blue Bottle Kiss record that you look back on with the most fondness? Because I know everyone, in terms of like fans, has a favorite, but is there one that you're most fond of or most proud of at all?
I mean, predictably, it's usually the last thing that I'm involved with, the most recent thing, and it's weird because when Blue Bottle Kiss on occasion gets together and plays to get like we are later this year.
Mm.
At the moment, it's the lineup of Fletcher, Richo, Groundsy, and me, which is a pretty special lineup and one of the ones that was probably the most popular. And there's a real chemistry between the four of us. But I am kind of attached to. It's no discredit to those guys because they're amazing. But their Doubtsy's the very last album. It's probably the one I feel the most fondness for.
Personally, I'm a huge Revenge is Slow fan, but possibly because that was the first one I heard. So you always sort of stick with that sort of thing. But as I say, everyone has a favorite, and it's always nice to know from the folks who are in the thick of it. In this case, yourself. But I guess I should probably move on a little bit from the Blue Bottle Kiss questions at the moment, and because I mean it was about what 15 years ago that the band split, and then you focused on a solo career in earnest. So I guess to put it simply, you've been a little bit prolific on that front, but what was it like for you to sort of effectively go out on your own and say, look, this is me as an artist? Was that a liberating experience for yourself, or was there a bit of apprehension in sort of shedding the band and sort of going at it by yourself?
I think at the time I felt ripe for a change, like just trying to keep a band together, the logistics of that. And it's a big ask to have other people be dedicated to touring and recording with not a lot coming back other than the enjoyment of doing it. Being solo and initially and just working in a studio mostly on my own, just getting people in and out. And also when I started touring around that time, I had a very mobile take on it. Like if I did a show or if I got an opportunity to travel, I could go on my own or I could go with one other person or I could go with two other people. It was really loose, It wasn't like if that person's not there, then that's not the band type thing. It was like once you put it under your own name, you can kind of do anything. It's very, very flexible. So I really enjoyed that. And I also enjoyed at the time stepping away from kind of really belting it out and sort of yelling over a band. In those earlier, the first few solo records, I really enjoyed the more minimalist element. It can become a real security blanket, just the wall of noise around you. I mean, it's incredibly enjoyable, but it was really fun to make something out of very little when I first started doing solo stuff. So for me, it was refreshing at the time.
Mm. I also like how you were just saying before about the fact that if one person isn't there, it's not the band. So it feels very much the Mark E. Smith of the Fall approach, where he'd always say as long as it's him, or if it's him and your granny on bongos, it's the Fall sort of thing.
Yeah.
It feels quite fitting for what you're describing there.
Yeah,
But
well, that's the thing with Blue Bottle was becoming like the fall. Like people just were leaving for other reasons, and eventually I was starting to feel like the Marquis Smith of Blue Bottle Kiss, and so when it's under your own name, you can I know it just feels more legit to be able to do that for real rather than trying to sort of keep that together and you know you're the only person and there's a revolving lineup. So yeah, that was kind of liberating to a degree.
So then going from the solo stuff in back into a band with Infinity Broke, how did that sort of, I guess, feel to sort of go from being, I mean, obviously you mentioned before that Infinity Broke is a lot more, I guess, loose and sporadic, I guess, and it's a little bit familial as well. You've got some family involved in there, but I guess how did that feel going from, one band to a solo career and then going into a totally different band? Like, was it a little bit of a, switching mindsets all the time?
I think because I hadn't played noisy music for so long, I felt really energized playing with Infinity Broke. And with Blue Bottle, for instance, I sort of felt like we would put all our eggs in one basket. Like I only really had time for the one project. And so any song I would write would be a possible Blue Bottle Kiss song. And then I guess over the past 15 years, 10, 15 years, I've started writing things that are more project based. So and some of them cross over a bit, but Infinity Broke was very much very visceral, experimental, noisy music to a degree. And I hadn't played that sort of music for quite a long time, nearly 10 years by the time we started. So it was sort of fairly full throttle, really, and really enjoyed it. And I mean, the thing is too, is that I'd released an album called Avalon Cassettes, which is a solo record. It's very acoustic, but it's pretty much the lineup that became Infinity Broke. But a couple of the members sort of swapped their their roles, but it's sort of morphed, transitioned into Infinity Broke in a way. I just started bringing. That's another whole story, really. But I,
Mm.
yeah, started bringing noisier sort of songs in with some of the people from that. And originally it was sort of a solo thing. And then, yeah, there's the other guys. I think it was my brother Scott that was really like, this should be a band name, not one of your solo things. And that's what happened. It kind of morphed.
Because I remember I don't know how I managed to miss the Infinity Broke stuff, but I didn't actually know about Infinity Broke until about 2021, I think, because at the time I was writing as the editor of Rolling Stone Australia, and I think I did an article on the release of Death of a Tourist. And I remember just sort of thinking, oh wow, there's such like there's a bit of a back catalogue to go into. And
Mm.
I just remember sort of like devouring it and sort of being like, firstly, how did I miss this? But secondly, it's nice to see the evolution over the years and going from where it started to what it is now. And like, I guess for yourself, is that something that you sort of look back at and sort of think, oh, okay, we've started here, now we're at this point. Like, um, I guess, how do you sort of view that evolution? Like, is it just something that comes naturally, or is it something you're always pushing forward, trying to be a bit more progressive?
Yeah, it's not really a matter of just, oh, I've got a bunch of songs, get together with the guys type thing. It's definitely more deliberate in terms of the approach, even before it's written. I tend to kind of think about, well, with Infinity Broke, a big part of the sound is that there's a drum kit and then there's a second kit which is sort of made up of bits of drums and other bits of found percussion, some of it quite industrial. And a lot of the time I'm the only guitarist, and the bass lines that Ruben plays are often very repetitive, and it's very much about elements of some of the compositions having real freeform parts with this really droning, repetitive percussion. And so for me, I've just wanted to push that element further and further. It doesn't always happen that way because, um, different members of the band want to do different things. Like my brother Scott, is a great drummer, but he's never really had much of a chance to play guitar. And just loves, like when we were growing up, he was really into the Celibate Rifles and Radio Birdman, and when we were both into a lot of that garage rock, but he has that element too where he just wants to do a two guitar bass drums rock thing. So to a degree, we put a little bit of that in there as well. So sometimes there's two paths to the band, but yeah, there is that progressive element where each album for me personally, I'm very much into it going, I don't know, challenging the band and it going
Mm.
further out usually.
Yeah, right. So, and it was just a couple of years ago now, so in 2022, I think it was, that we did see a return from Bluebottle Kiss. Sorry to go back in a bit of a bit of a loop back to the start, I guess. But I guess in a weird way, that was a band I thought would not reunite for some reason. So, I guess how did that happen? Had you foreseen a reunion at all? I mean, or was it a case of you just didn't really think it would actually be something that would happen?
I think, well, personally, I was sort of ambivalent about it, but I didn't really mind either way because I invested so much energy into it back in the day, and so it felt like we produced some really good work, and was quite happy to call it done. But we all stayed in contact, even through all the different dramas that go on with bands. We've all managed to stay on good terms, and Fletcher and I have always been in contact. We've never lost contact. And same with Groundsy. Richo I hadn't seen for ages, but I can't. I'm even trying. Fletcher would sort of actually stay in contact, and he would always mention it, like, "Oh, we should do this," you know. And I'm like, "Oh yeah," but it was always like, "Why is it that I'm going to have to be the person to make it?" That's the thing I didn't want to have to do. Was I was kind of like, I'd kind of be into it if somebody else made it happen. And then um, Matt, who is a fan I met in Perth, started looking into reissuing some of our material. And I think it was probably about then that we thought, well, we talked about it, yeah, on and off for ages. And it just, yeah, we just slowly started getting it together to do it. And it was really fun and still is when we do it.
Because I was lucky enough to see you guys at the Melbourne show at the Gasometer Hotel, and I just remember the crowd response. It was, I mean, it was absolutely phenomenal. I felt it felt like everyone had been waiting for about 14 years for this to happen again, and
Mm.
it I mean, how did it feel for you? Like, was it sort of like stepping back, into 2006, 2007 or something, or had it felt like time had passed?
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it was kind of visceral. Like, yeah, it felt really, this is a really weird word to use, but it felt really easy.
Mm,
Even though the music doesn't sound easy, felt it felt easy. Sometimes projects can be really hard getting people together and so forth. But I mean, what happened between the crowd and us was just part of the ride. The main thing was when we got together in a room, I was so surprised at how quickly, especially when Groundsy joined, because Richo, Fletcher and I, as we're doing now, because we all live in Sydney, we were kind of just getting the nuts and bolts together, which was, that came together pretty quick. But once the bass came in with Groundsy, basically it was like, oh, it's like no time had passed. And it was just like, it's like I was driving a really smooth automatic car. It was really like I could almost walk away. And the songs come back so quickly that you can kind of walk away from the bits of like, how do I do this and what's that word? And it just seemed to be just, I don't know,
yeah.
muscle memory. And of course, it's enjoyable seeing people's response. I suppose that's that thing. Scarcity always does that. You hold off for a long time, and people value it more, and they really yearn for it. And when it happens, it brings them back to all types of places. Music is so much about memory and so forth. And I guess the other thing I noticed sometimes was it's about it bonds people.
Mm.
I always thought Bluebottle was a real loners band because our hardcore fans, I can't name how many like just single guys would come up and speak to me after shows, and they'd be there at heaps of shows on their own. That was a really big part, probably is still a big part of the audience, whether it's Bluebottle and some of the other projects. But I saw a bonding sort of happen at shows where a bunch of people would be coming together and reliving something.
Yeah.
It's almost something that's outside of myself. It's just like, oh, this is happening. I don't even know what it is or how it happens, or all these people that take home your music to their lives, to their own little lives and so forth. It's quite. I don't think about it that much. I mean, it's beautiful, but
Mm.
it's quite strange in its way.
I mean, I guess it's the sort of thing you can't really sort of focus on too much because as a musician, it's effectively your job, if you will, to create, and then whatever happens after it leaves your station, it's up to the whims of the universe, effectively, isn't it?
Totally. And I very much have that approach. That's just naturally the way that I'm wired is if you create work that you are really satisfied with and you think is really good and it's hit the right spot for you, even if it's gone somewhere unexpected, but you still feel like it's powerful, then you then kind of release it to the world. And what I don't really try and second guess what other people like or anything like that. That's just not really in my musical vocabulary. I mean, you do to a degree, like just thinking about writing set lists and what works. And there's certain songs. And I mean, that's the good thing of playing with other people. Like they'll sometimes bring me down to earth and go, "We've got to play this song. People love that song," like, and not be too selfish about it or
Yeah.
just oblivious. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I guess on more contemporary sort of matters as well, there are these upcoming shows with Scream Theatre in, I think it's November. So this is obviously a great opportunity for folks to see Bluebottle Kiss. And you're also touring with such an amazing band and some amazing supports, including the great Flat Stanley from my hometown, Adelaide. But
All
I guess
right.
apart from these shows, do you foresee a future where we might get new music from Bluebottle Kiss? Or is it a case of, you know what, it was something in the past, it'll just exist as a live entity?
I'm personally really enjoy just to getting together with the guys every now and then and just playing really powerful shows. It's really satisfying. It's just another flavor of, I don't know, just another element of music making. In terms of new material, I don't really think about it personally because I've got other things on the go which I've kind of got my head stuck in the sand with those. Whether people are listening or not, they're kind of projects that I know that's where my head's at. And then Blue Bottle's almost a diversion, like a fun diversion. But
Mm.
I don't really. I think it's silly to go, oh, never going to do that, or we're never going to get together again, or anything like that. I'm pretty open, but as to whether that would ever happen, I don't know. And obviously, a lot of it would have to do with me doing something about it. But we have quite a rich back catalogue, and it feels like we can explore so many different corners of it, and
Of
really
course.
enjoying the reissue process and so forth. So, kind of feel like with newer music, I probably focus on more current projects, but that could change
Yeah.
one day when we're 64. I don't know.
Bringing back the Beatles references, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, because I mean, the other thing I was going to say as well is that just you're talking about the reissues, for example, and also the music that you're making. So I guess apart from these upcoming shows, what is your current focus? Are you currently writing any solo music or stuff with Infinity Broke?
Yeah, I'm mixing an Infinity Broke album.
Mm.
So we don't play very often, but we recorded an album a few months ago, and I mixed my last two solo records. That was the first time I'd ever mixed albums, and so recorded the Infinity Broken album at a studio. But I kind of thought, oh, I'll try and mix this. So I'm doing that, and it's really hard. It's really, really hard. Like mixing compared to mixing music, which is more minimalist and which doesn't have massive frequencies. Like it's proving a real challenge. But that's taking up all my musical headspace is mixing this Infinity Broke album. So that's what I'm mostly focusing on musically. Um, it's finishing that.
Right. Amazing. Well, I'm certainly keen to hear it, and definitely keen to see how these mixing efforts have paid off as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Amazing. Well, I think we should get down to the portion of the podcast from which its namesake is derived. So, Trusty Chords sees me follow the 1, 3, and 5 structure of a standard chord, and I ask about one artist that's impacted you, 3 albums that have influenced you, and 5 songs you can always turn to. And these albums and songs don't need to be by your one artist either. So, I guess my first question for you here, Jamie, is who is the one artist that has inspired you the most, whether it be personally or creatively?
Yeah, I was thinking of all types of people when you're asking this. But I think I'm going to go with Tom Waits.
Mm.
Obviously very very popular artist. I'm not probably giving anybody anything new here, but it seems silly not to not to say that he's probably one of the most influential artists for me personally. He kind of ticks all the boxes for inspiration in terms of obviously how adventurous he is with sound, how fearless he is in terms of what he will attempt and generally succeed at, but also moments of real beauty and poetry and fantastic songwriting
Mm.
as well.
He is a truly amazing artist. It's such a shame we haven't heard anything new from him in such a long time. But
Yeah, it's like he's retired or something. I don't. I
yeah.
think. Yeah.
I think it was a few months ago, actually, on this podcast, I interviewed CJ Ramone, who was the final bassist of the Ramones, and the first song that he picked as his favorite, one of his influential songs was Tom Waits' "Innocent When You Dream," and it was one
Okay.
I hadn't heard that in so long, and to actually go back to that and sort of just hear it again and rediscover it, it felt like I just discovered this almost like a long lost recording from Tom Waits, and it was such a wonderful experience to go back and here's something
Mm.
I'd just totally forgotten about. And it just goes to show the impact that Tom Waits still has.
Yeah.
His writing, his performances, they're just, what's the word I'm looking for? Sensational. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. He exists on so many planes. Like there's sincerity and there's artifice. Like there's like a real theatrical element. It's that element of like, where does the person begin? Where do they stop? That's what I mean. He's sort of created his own mythology, which I think is fantastic. Yeah, there's places that he goes which are where it's hard to know where even when you hear him get interviewed, he just sort of makes stuff up half the time. It's hard to know exactly where the real person starts, and yet there's so much of it which is incredibly moving as well, and other times just jarring and strange. So yeah, it's definitely has everything I like about music in it.
Mm. I mean, actually, speaking as someone who has recently finished writing a book on the band Tism, I know exactly how it feels to have be getting like false answers and everything from interviews and everything. It's been an absolute, it's been a head scratcher, that's for sure. um,
Oh, wow.
But I guess my next question is, what are three albums that have impacted you the most? This could be albums you're always throwing on, or something that was integral to your musical evolution.
Yeah, well, this can change all the time, but I scribbled a few down quickly before we started talking. And there's one that I haven't mentioned for a while, when it comes to this sort of thing of lists, but I just thought I just should because it had such a profound effect to me is Dinosaur Jr.'s second album, You're Living All Over Me.
Oh yes.
That was just a game changer for me when I heard that. That's one of those things where you remember exactly where you were and what you were doing when you started listening to it. It seemed like they just had a recipe that was built for me musically. So when I was about 16, I think I heard Freak Scene really, really late at night on Triple J, and I was studying fine arts at the time, and there was this tall, gangly gothic guy that was in my class, and I asked him, "Have you heard of this band Dinosaur Jr.?" And he was like, "Oh, I've got a friend that's really into them. I'll talk to him." And he back then that was the days where people would make you compilation tapes, and I was given compilation tapes by older art students all the time, which really, really blew my mind, and I discovered so much interesting music that way. In that class, but he came back to school and gave me this compilation tape of at that stage, Dinosaur only had the three albums, their self-titled one, You're Living All Over Me and Bug, and he gave me this compilation tape. And yeah, just the songs from You're Living All Over Me in particular had, I guess at the time, I'd been listening to either a lot of Australian underground music. So it was either really flat out sort of garagey rock, like the Celibate Rifles, the New Christs, I'm Spiders, stuff like that, or I was listening to more dreamy, sort of melancholy music like The Church, The Cure, and so forth. And Dinosaur seemed to be both together. Like it had this real sort of cathartic heaviness to it, like really screeching wah wah, and like real. It was heavy, but it's also very beautiful. Like the melodies have a real yearning to them, and there's something very mysterious about those early records as well. They have their, like I was saying about Tom Waits, they sort of have their own little universe.
Mm.
So yeah, that album I played it. I mean, I don't listen to it anymore because I played it between the ages of like sort of 16 and 19. I just played the first three Dinosaur albums over and over and over again.
Actually, just hearing you sort of describe that album in terms of like having all the, like the heaviness and the melodic beauty, I guess I'm definitely seeing some parallels in Bluebottle Kiss there as well, with the heaviness and the mind paid to melody as well. So I'm starting to sort of put the threads together a little bit, I feel.
Yeah, yeah, they were a big band for me early on, and I think you can hear it in our early. Particularly, I didn't really get passionate about playing guitar till I heard Jay Mascis, particularly early on before he became too much of a shredder.
Mm.
Um, when he was kind of just making a cacophony, that really inspired me to play guitar.
Yeah. And what's your next album?
So the next album I thought I'd put down would be Can, Tago Mago.
Oh yes, the wonderful album.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's one of those albums like a lot of my favorite albums that you'll discover something new every time you hear it. It's just a wild and hypnotic and disturbing world that they create. Uh, yeah, and it's extremely ambitious and courageous and just yeah, very very imaginative. I love their first four albums, and I love I love their rhythms and their repetition. But also on this album, all the tape delays, all the crazy tape delays and field recordings that they fly into stuff, and all the editing and so forth. It's just like, where am I now? You know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a very dizzying experience, isn't it?
totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's an absolutely wonderful album and definitely a wonderful band as well. It's another band which is I really wish that we got a lot more music from those that that golden age of their output as well.
Yeah, because they kept going and kept producing so much music, but the kind of period where they had vocalists, even the like Malcolm Mooney period, like the first album,
Mm,
Monster Movie is amazing as well. That's more garagey, but yeah, the Malcolm Mooney, Damo Suzuki era of that band is pretty untouchable.
absolutely. And we've got one album left. So what would that one be for you?
Yeah, there's so many I could choose for, but I'm gonna say Big Star's Third Sister Lovers.
Mm,
Uh, and that was with Blue Bottle Kisses reissue of Fear of Girls, which I've actually just got a box of records of it today. I haven't opened them yet, but that was I know that personally I was listening to that and playing it in the tour van with Peter and Fletch a lot when we made that album. It's I mean it's not like Tego Mago, but it's really sprawling. Like there's moments of kind of apocalyptic sort of dreamy despair and then really sleepy beauty and then moments of classic melodic guitar pop
mm.
as well, which is what they'd been very well known for up to that point. But I guess you could almost say it's an undisciplined, sprawling kind of record. I think Jim Dickinson, who produced it, ended up sequencing it because it came out years after the band had split up. And I don't know how you could sequence it because it's just so all over the shop. But yeah, it's kind of, I mean, that's the reason why I like the White Album by the Beatles as well. Sometimes there's the odd band that can pull that off, and it's not the classic cohesive album in the way that people would imagine. It's a mess, but it's really a really wonderful mess.
Because I mean, usually when people mention a Big Star, they usually go for number one record or something like that. Whereas Third Sister Lovers, it's definitely. I mean, as you said, it's very sort of yeah. It's so it would be so hard to sequence. I mean, you've got songs like Holocaust on there, which are just so I guess eerie in this apocalyptic sense, and they're just right next to these like beautiful sort of like poppy power pop numbers at the same time as well. It's such a strange sort of beast, and especially when you sort of really I guess get into it and see how there were what three or four different versions of the album released over the years, and it's so hard to sort
Yeah.
of work out. Yeah, it seems like it shouldn't work. It just seems like an absolute mess, but
Mm.
it's just a wonderful record once you're actually able to sort of I guess find a version that works for yourself and just
Yeah.
devour it.
It's got really good use of reverb as well, because, you know, I for a period didn't like reverb at all just because of being an 80s teenager,
Mm.
but it's got that really utilizes like reverb on feedback and like weird sort of improvised drums with loads of reverb. There's this really dreamy element that comes that 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 is a big part of that record that yeah has that big sort of hall reverb which just works really cool. Whenever I think about using any kind of reverb, I always think of the Sister Lovers.
Mm. Yeah, truly a wonderful record by again another wonderful band. You're really picking the great bands and artists today. I'm noticing. So you're doing a great job here, Jamie. Um,
Thanks.
but I guess lastly, I'd love to know the 5 songs that you could sort of always turn to. You know, whether it be for comfort, for excitement. You know, your 5 trusty songs.
Yeah, I mean, again, these aren't even really five trusty songs. I just sort of tried to get some different flavors of things that I really love. Some of them I don't even listen to all the time, but they're just music that I think is profound in some way. The first one, this is a really long song title, but so the artist, it's a trio of names. So it's KG Hano, Jim O'Rourke, and Oren Ambachi. Uh, so they do these improvised records, improvised live records. They've released a lot of them, and then out of the live recordings, they kind of edit them and release albums. And they're I don't even know the sequence of their albums, but there's an album which is well, the song is the same name as the album. It's a really long song title. It's called "In the Past, Only Geniuses Were Capable of Staging the Perfect Crime," also known as a revolution. Today, anybody can accomplish their aims with a push of the button. Part two. So there's a part one and part two. It's like 17 minutes long. I don't know if you've ever heard these guys or heard any. I mean, you
I
probably know
Yeah,
them, like
I
Jim
know the
O'Rourke and
names
stuff.
separately, but I don't think I've ever listened to them as a as a collective. But I mean that's certainly a difficult title to get on the you know on the A side label, isn't it?
Yeah, all their song titles are ridiculously long. But yeah, KG Hano's had a big influence on me as a guitar player, probably over the past 10 years. He just creates these colossal walls of sound. He's an incredibly visceral guitar player, but then also fantastic at creating this atmosphere. And of course, Jim O'Rourke on bass and Oren Ambachi on drums. Oren Ambachi is usually well known as a guitarist as well, but they have such uh, yeah, there's just this real symbiosis going on between them. But this song is more, I mean, it's sort of noisy, but more ambient. And Keiji Hana also, because he's Japanese and generally sings in Japanese, but on this one, he sings a bit in English. And it's really kind of, when he sings, it's like a howl. I mean, he's in his 60s, but his singing is so visceral and primitive and intense, but he keeps saying, what does he say? Um, I keep on changing. He keeps saying, he goes, no, he starts off with saying, "Do you have a mystery?" He keeps saying, "Do you have a mystery?" And then he says, "I keep on changing. You can change just you," which I guess is sort of like broken English in a way. Like you can change just you, just you. It's not probably grammatically correct, but I don't know. I like the sentiment of that lyric, and I think it's the only time I remember out of all their records him singing in English as well.
Wow. You know, I'm definitely eager to actually check this out because I actually, as we speak, I'm looking up the album actually and looking at the song titles. And I will admit, I was looking at their Bandcamp page, and I thought I was reading a song title. No, it's actually a descriptor of the record, but it's just as long. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah, it's impossible to remember their song titles because I think they named them after they've
Hmm.
recorded. They're like like the Next or something. I think they just
Oh
create
yes.
music on the spot, but and then they kind of edit it and arrange it after they've recorded it, as far as I understand.
Yeah, I was going to say with song titles that long, I'd hate to read their set lists.
Yeah.
um, and for your next song, what have you picked there?
Yeah, I picked a really beautiful soul song that I just find really I don't know, it's well, okay, it's Betty LaVette, Let Me Down Easy.
Mhm.
So I think she was about 16 when she recorded it, and I'm not sure when it was recorded. I'm thinking Yeah. I don't know. I'd have to look it up. It mo
1965, apparently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's an amazing vocal performance. It's one of those classic vocal performances where everything like it like they did with a lot of those Motown recordings where things are distorting to tape and they've got that kind of reverb going as well. And it's just cheers you up. It's just such an uh, emotive performance and a really amazing song with that classic garage soul
Yeah. No,
production.
because hers is a name which I've seen around a lot, but I think she was someone who like she only sort of like received sort of I guess sparse fame until about the last 20 years or so, I think, when she sort of really suddenly had a career resurgence.
Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
which I guess that's actually, I mean, despite the fact I'm looking her up currently, that's actually something that I was aware of from the recesses of my memory. But I guess it goes to show sort of how underrated she is. If if the song you're picking is almost 60 years old, yeah, it's only in the last
Yeah.
20 she got this widespread mainstream fame.
Yeah, she released I think a couple of 7-inch singles in the early mid 60s when she was really young and didn't it didn't really stick. She didn't wasn't really able to make a career. And I mean I've got lots of records from this period by similar artists with a similar kind of trajectory, you know, maybe they make one album that's amazing. And then it's like Lee Moses, one album.
Mm.
There's a whole bunch of people who I love from that world. But I think she did some disco stuff in the 80s and that kind of thing. And then she ended up being rediscovered and, you know, recording. I'm not sure who rediscovered her, but it's a bit like I'm having a blank. There's a few other people from that world but it's said that the same thing has happened to. But yeah, I'm just really stuck on that one song. It's just a
Yeah.
killer.
And what was your next song that you've got?
Um, yeah, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, From Her to Eternity.
Mm.
So the very first Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds album, From Her to Eternity, I think it's a really striking album because it's like a transitional period between the birthday party and him moving more onto, you know, the Bad Seeds sound, which is more cinematic and more song based. But that first album sounds like a collision between the two groups. Like it's still got that incredibly chaotic, raucous, yeah, that sort of, I mean, there's sort of places that go, I mean, there's other bands like I think of Swans and stuff like that, where it's like, it's really unhinged. And, but the beginnings of his singer-songwriter period. And there's one song called Cabin Fever on it, which is really intense and just the way it jars from left to right and the speakers. But From Her to Eternity is probably the best example of the tension and release thing that those early records and birthday party records have. Like Blix a Bar Girl
Mm.
guitar playing on it is just it's just noise guitar pretty much, but it's like it's this splintering kind of sound and it's very erratic. There's like a jackhammer, these bits and pieces that just sort of spark up and then disappear and spark up and disappear. It's just got this incredible build build to it, like a real tension. That record's very claustrophobic and
Yeah.
you can't listen to it, you know, any old time, but it's a very powerful experience when you do.
And I have to say, it's also very bold for an artist like Nick Cave, especially when you look at him now. But you did go back 40 years, and you sort of look at the fact that he's started his debut sort of I guess solo album, if you will, with a cover of a Leonard Cohen song. It's a bit of a
Mm.
bold move to sort of say like, hey, here's my album, by the way, going to start with one of the greats. Want to sort of
Yeah.
ease people into it a little bit before you get into something like Cabin Fever as the second song. It's a bit of a bold choice, I feel, but it's worked for him. He's doing pretty well.
Yeah, yeah. And it makes sense. Like the Leonard Cohen thing makes total sense. As I mean, particularly as he kept rolling on, yeah.
Yeah. And what have we got next on the list?
Um, I thought Sweet Thing by Van Morrison from Astral Weeks.
Mm, it's a wonderful album, that one. I think it's an album I think it's hard to find someone who doesn't love.
Yeah, it's an album that constantly keeps giving. You know, you learn something from it every time. And I think Van Morrison is probably one of my favorite singers. Like just, he's very in the zone and just delivers in such a soulful, uh, I don't know, a soulful, unself-conscious kind of way. It's pretty special what he does as a vocalist. And his music also, to me, has a lot of joy in it, but it's not saccharine, there's a real depth to it. Like to me, it captures the term soul music. And Sweet Thing is just a very beautiful and uplifting song. And his music always has an element of, well, I guess he references places of his childhood and so forth. There isn't that sort of nostalgic, sentimental element to it, but he just delivers it all in a way that's very, very captivating. And it's quite an ethereal record, that one. I mean, everyone knows, the story behind Astral Weeks, the way it was recorded quickly with musicians. You didn't know that well. I don't know if it was a happy accident or what, but it's just really evocative kind of collection of songs, and just recorded in a really interesting and imaginative way.
Actually, I think it's about 2-3 years ago. I had the opportunity actually come my way to interview Van Morrison, but unfortunately it fell apart due to COVID related things. And
Oh no!
yeah, I really regret that. Him and Brian Wilson were the two interviews I lost out on due to COVID. But I just remember writing all my questions down ahead of time, and I realized that all of the questions are about Astral Weeks, and I realized he'd probably want to talk about his latest work, I guess. So yeah, but sadly never got to ask them. So who knows? One day, and I'll be sure to mention Sweet Thing.
Yeah.
And I think we have one song left. Is that right?
Yeah. So I thought I'd go for I think it's pronounced it Bilero by Sonny Sharrock. So again, this is sort of more down the experimental route. Sonny Sharrock's I guess what they would call a free jazz guitar player, and this album was recorded, I think, in 1969. And I mean, I'm not sure if it's credited just to Sonny Sharrock or Sonny Sharrock, Linda Sharrock, because his wife is a big part of it as well. And it's a free jazz kind of album, but with a focus more on guitar. So in a way, his guitar playing is doing similar things to people like Ornette Coleman and Pharoah Sanders and people like that. It's very much jazz, and the recording has that really open, freewheeling feel that jazz has, and it's recorded with that beautiful aesthetic that music has, but it's very, very wild and at times very, very beautiful. This song starts off with this almost glissando feel where there's no real rhythm. It's like a free rhythm and it's like a waterfall. And then it just gets more and more intense. And Linda Sharrock, she can really sing, but she will also do this sort of free singing, like Yoko Ono sort of style, where she just will completely sing it in a totally unhinged way, which is equal to the drumming and guitar playing that's going on. So again, it's not a record you can listen to all the time, but it's the album's called Black Woman. It's a fantastic record.
Sonny Sharrock he's someone I've heard of, but I've never actually listened to him before. So I'm actually very excited to. I mean, you've given me a few songs to check out today. So this, everyone's winning with this podcast, aren't they?
Hope so. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's very exploratory kind of music, but it's a total cult record. And it's the record he's famous for. He didn't release a great deal of material before he died, but that's kind of his masterpiece.
Amazing. Well, Jamie Hutchings, I just want to say thank you so very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure. And also thank you so much for being part of the Trusty Chords podcast as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks heaps for having me, Tyler.
Thank you for listening to Trusty Chords. If you listened to this episode and enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you were able to take a few moments to like, follow, share, and review this podcast on your preferred platform of choice. As always, there's no obligation, but I'm forever grateful if you do. As always, I'm over on Instagram and Facebook at Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. I've also got a blog on my website, which is tylerjenke.com. That's tylerjenke/Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. That's where you can find a blog for the podcast, articles on each episode, and a playlist featuring songs chosen by guests each week. I do use Spotify to run an ongoing playlist, and as such there's a few songs that won't show up. That's why you're not going to be able to hear "In the past, only geniuses were capable of staging the perfect crime," also known as Revolution. Today anybody can accomplish their aims with the push of a button part 2, unless you look it up on Bandcamp. Sorry, Jamie. Obviously you know by now what you can find on the site, but you'll also find a link to the Buy Me a Coffee platform where you can throw me a few dollars to keep this podcast running if you feel so inclined. Lastly, I need to thank Jamie Hutchings for spending time with me this week for the podcast, and I also need to thank Chris Hamilton for helping organise the chat as well. But once again, thank you kindly for listening, and I hope to see you all again next week as I continue to celebrate music and those that create it.